So Jesus has just been crucified. His followers, they're completely scattered, they're terrified, and they're in hiding. But over the next 40 days, something happens that will literally change the course of human history. So today, in this explainer, we're going to piece together the timeline of this incredible period, pulling from all the various biblical accounts to see how it all went down.
And here's the big question, right? How does this small, defeated group of people go on to ignite a worldwide movement? Well, the answer, according to the sources, all starts in these 40 days. And this was a time defined by fear, by total disbelief, and by a series of events that turned their entire world upside down.
Okay, so it all kicks off on the first Sunday morning after the crucifixion. The disciples are literally locked away, fearing for their lives. The mood is just one of deep, deep grief and utter confusion.
You know, the tension this whole weekend was just off the charts. You've got Roman guards stationed at the tomb. This was a direct order because the authorities were actually afraid someone would try to steal the body. At the same time, the women who followed Jesus are getting spices ready for a proper burial. And then, in the dark, before the sun even comes up, an earthquake hits, an angel appears, and the whole scene just explodes into chaos.
Mary Magdalene is the first one to get there, and when she sees that massive stone rolled away from the entrance, her mind just leaps to the only logical and, horrible conclusion: somebody stole the body. She doesn't even bother looking inside. She just turns and runs to get Peter and John.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. As we try to stitch all this together from the different Gospels, you'll notice these little variations, kind of like different witness statements after a single really chaotic event. For instance, Matthew and Mark mention one angel at the tomb, but Luke and John say there were two. Now, instead of a contradiction, many folks see this as a sign of authenticity, like these are independent accounts, not some perfectly coordinated story. Our chronology here tries to harmonize all these perspectives. So hearing this news, Peter and John just take off. They sprint to the tomb. John, being younger, gets there first, peeks in, but kind of hesitates. Peter, being Peter, just barrels right on in, and what they see stops them cold. The linen burial cloths are just lying there, and the head covering is folded up neatly by itself. For John, seeing that order in the midst of the chaos, that's the moment. The text says right then and there, he believed.
But an empty tomb is one thing. What happens next is a total game changer. The story shifts from a missing body to a series of just stunning personal appearances.
So get this, the very first person to see the resurrected Jesus is Mary Magdalene, who had gone back to the tomb and was just weeping. A little bit later, he appears to the other women too. And here's what's so important. Both times, he gives them a very specific mission: go and tell my disciples.
So, imagine this. These women who've just had the most mind-blowing experience of their entire lives rush back to the apostles to deliver this unbelievable news. They've seen him. They've talked to him. He's alive.
And how do the apostles react? With total disbelief. The accounts are just brutally honest about this. They actually dismiss the women's story as nonsense. Their grief and their fear were so powerful that the idea of a resurrection was, to them, just impossible.
Meanwhile, while the disciples are freaking out and calling it nonsense, the authorities are already spinning up a cover-up. The Roman guards who were terrified reported back to the religious rulers, who basically paid them a huge bribe to spread a lie, that the disciples came and stole the body in the middle of the night.
So this is the big question, right? How do you get from "that's nonsense" to becoming the foundation of a global faith? It all happens through a series of direct, personal encounters.
Later that same Sunday, you've got two disciples walking away from Jerusalem, just completely crushed. Some stranger joins them on the road and starts explaining how all the scriptures pointed to exactly this moment. They still don't really get it until they sit down to eat. And as he breaks the bread, their eyes are open and bam, it's Jesus. And in that same instant, he vanishes.
So that same night, picture this. The apostles are hiding out, doors locked, absolutely terrified. And then, out of nowhere, Jesus is just there, right in the room with them. He shows them the wounds in his hands and his side. He gives them their first commission. But there's a problem. One of them, Thomas, wasn't there to see it.
All right, so this next part of the story is all about making this unbelievable reality sink in, especially for one very famous skeptic.
So when the others find Thomas and tell him we've seen the Lord, he's just not having it. And his response is so famous we still use the phrase today, doubting Thomas. He makes it perfectly clear, unless I can see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, I will not believe.
So a whole week goes by. They're all back in that room again. And this time, Thomas is with them.
And once again, even with the door locked, Jesus just appears. He goes right to Thomas and basically says, "Okay, here I am. Do what you said you needed to do." And for Thomas, that direct personal proof was everything. It was the final, undeniable confirmation.
But the appearances don't stop there. The disciples head back to their old stomping grounds in Galilee, and 7 of them decide to go fishing. They're out all night and they catch absolutely nothing. Then, some guy on the shore shouts out to them, tells them to throw their net on the other side of the boat.
They do it probably thinking, what have we got to lose? And they haul in this absolutely massive catch of fish, so big they can barely get it into the boat. But here's this weirdly specific detail the Gospel of John includes. There were exactly 153 fish. It's a number that has fascinated people for centuries, with some suggesting it was symbolic of all the known nations in the world back then. A little hint of the global mission that was coming.
Okay, so at this point, their belief has pretty much solidified. And that's when the real purpose of these 40 days starts to become crystal clear. This wasn't just about proving he was alive. It was about prepping them for what came next.
And this really gets to the heart of it all. The final command to go and make disciples of all nations, what we now call the Great Commission, wasn't just some casual, one-off suggestion. The sources show he repeated it again and again, in different places, to different groups. He was really driving the point home.
Think about that. At least 4 separate times. It's like he's hammering the point home that their whole identity is about to change. Their job isn't just to follow him anymore. Their job now is to go out and build a global movement, fueled by everything they've just seen and heard.
And that brings us to the end of the 40 days. They're on the Mount of Olives, right outside Jerusalem. He gives them some final instructions, a promise of empowerment that's still to come. And then, right there in front of them, he begins to ascend, until a cloud hides him from their sight.
So, when you look back at this whole timeline, what's the legacy of these 40 days? Well, according to the source material, this period was the absolute turning point. It took the scattered, terrified group of doubting people and forged them into the unified, confident core of a faith that would, literally, change the world. It gave them the proof they needed and the purpose that would drive them for the rest of their lives.